I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much to the Dextegon team for bringing me in. And it's a fun time to be alive, right? Like this is really, there's a lot of great things going on. I think as people who came up in the sales world when we just had to experience the pain of just trying things out on real human beings and over again, and like awkward interactions, it's really fun to see that we jumpstart our activity now with a lot of the great tools that we're going to see today. But what I want to talk about today is one of the things that I think is the most important way you can improve the way that you influence people, and that is specifically speaking so that they hear the message that you are intending to convey. So speaking that the way that you are heard. And so I think we've all been in this scenario where we're kind of wondering why something works one time and doesn't work another. So you craft this really convincing pitch, and based on, you're like, I would totally buy it based on what I'm saying right now. It works. You go out there and you get a customer and it's great, and then you think this is perfect. I've got my pitch. You go out and you try it with the next customer, completely falls flat. So why is that? And as I'm talking and as I'm going through the information today, I'd love for you guys to think about the two scenarios where you have customers that you've clicked with right away. They're fun to interact with. You seem to just always be on the same page. And then you've got the customers where you're almost dreading when you have to pick up the phone call, or you're really concerned because you think, oh my God, this is going to be an awkward interaction. It's always a little uncomfortable. But what I want to show you today is, what if I told you that the research says that the more uncomfortable you are, the more successful you'll actually be? So this is true. Many years ago, these two industrial psychologists named David Merrill and Roger Reed went out to try to find common traits in high performers in the corporate world. And in that process, they actually uncovered something else. What they uncovered is that there's a gap in how we intend to show ourselves to people and what people are actually perceiving about us and judging us. And the cause for this gap is because people judge behavior differently based on the behavior that they themselves are most comfortable with. So that's the idea behind it. But the good news is that Reed and Merrill were also able to figure out a way to put together a framework that helps us identify specifically what's driving that gap in perception and come up with steps that we can use to change our own behavior so that other people are perceiving it the way that we want it to be perceived, so that we can speak so that we're heard the way that we intend to be heard. So, let's get into how it works. The research that Reed and Merrill did essentially uncovered in their analysis that there were common words used to describe people that the participants were talking about in the study. And when they took those words and they ran an analysis on them, they found that they clustered around two different parameters. So the first parameter is, how do I communicate when I'm trying to get someone to do something, when I'm trying to influence them? The second parameter is, how much emotion am I comfortable showing when I communicate with people? So you can see the two on here. And what they did was they combined these two parameters into a matrix. So we've got these 4 quadrants, and I'll walk through those 4 quadrants with you. We've got analytical zone, driving zone, expressive zone, and amiable zone. So let's look at how the 2 parameters break apart these zones first. And then we'll run through some more specific patterns of behavior among these zones. The vertical line describes how we speak when we're trying to influence other people. If you are to the left of this line, so this is what we call the ask side, you kind of come across as softer when you're trying to influence people. And specifically with the terminology with ask assertive, what happens is when you're trying to get someone to do something, you're actually asking a question. It looks like this. You say, can you get that to me by Tuesday? On the other side, the driving zone and expressive zone, where it's more tell assertive, that looks more familiarly assertive, where it's actually a command when they're giving you a command. It's get that to me by Friday. Another thing you'll see that's different between these two sides is on the ask side, if I'm in one of these two zones, if I'm asserting my opinion, I'm going to qualify it a little bit by a statement. I'm going to say, I think that, or I feel that. And on this side, in these zones, you're just stating facts as opinions. Or I'm sorry, the other way, you're stating opinions just as facts. So you'll see that. Now, looking at the horizontal line, that divides between whether or not you control emotion when you speak, that's the top, or you use emotion when you speak. So driving and analytical zones will tend to speak a little more monotone, definitely use fewer stories to connect with people in speaking. And the amiable and expressive zones will tend to use more emotion, say more words around, like, I care, I feel. You'll hear more emotional words in their conversations. That's how the two parameters work across. So let's just jump through, take a look at the 4 zones. I'm going to describe the patterns. I'd love for you guys, as I'm doing this, to identify not only where you think you are, but also some of your prospects, or people you know, or people you work with, you might be able to see them in this. So, analytical zone, the conversation is going to be around facts and data and proof, rather than stories, emotion, and people. And you're going to hear a lot about process and evidence and details, and you're often going to hear them ask questions that begin with how. How are we going to achieve this result? How are we going to integrate this into our systems? The driving zone, talking about goals and outcomes rather than people and feelings and ideas, but it's more around like the bottom line and impact and speed. So their questions will often begin with what and when. So what are we going to accomplish and when? And jumping back, so if you're in the analytical zone, one of the criticisms you'll often hear is you're too methodical, you're too risk averse, and sometimes it takes you too long to get going on what you're saying. So you'll tend to hear that if you're in the analytical zone. In the driving zone, what you'll hear is the opposite of that, which is, oh my gosh, you're impatient, you're bulldozing people, and you interrupt too much. Expressive zone, this is people and ideas rather than facts and data and outcomes. These are your great storytellers. If you're looking for somebody to help coach you on storytelling, or you want to model in your organization on storytelling, these are the storytellers. These are great people, so go do that. Their social network and their network are their power and influence. So that's what they're going to be talking about most of the time, is who they've got, who they know, who works with them, and that's what their questions are going to be about. They're going to say, who's already working with this? Who would I know who's already taking this on? The criticism you'll hear if you're comfortable in the expressive zone is that there's a lot of noise and a lot of action, and maybe not always like the results and the discipline going on there. And then finally, amiable zone, relationships and people rather than facts and data and outcomes. So most of the currency in this is on trusted, stable, secure relationships. You'll hear a lot of talk about the power of the relationships that you can deliver that are deep. Leading questions usually begin with who's impacted and how. The criticism that you'll hear if you're comfortable in this zone is you're just too nice. You're a little bit too much of a pushover. So that's the 4 zones. Now I'm hoping you're starting to see yourself or some others in this. And keep in mind though, if you're struggling to see, if you think you're in between some of these zones, this is a spectrum. And this is also very importantly, this is behavior, this is not personality. It's probably driven by personality, but this model doesn't get into that. It doesn't get into why or where it's coming from. It gets into what are we seeing and what are we conveying. So if you're struggling to find yourself in one of these, just keep in mind, every one of us can act like every one of these. We can display this behavior when we want to or we need to, but we're most comfortable in one of these zones. And that's why if you look at the history of what Reed and Merrill put together, it's been called Reed and Merrill Personality Index or social styles. My terminology for it is communication comfort zones, because that's really what it's describing. This behavior is what we have been most comfortable in. And that's why when you think about sticking in your comfort zone, why you want to be uncomfortable. if this is a standard distribution, this is how data journals set it up, so that it's 50% of the population on each side of either line, if you think about a standard distribution, what happens is you stay in your comfort zone. You're at risk of not being heard by 75% of the people that you're talking to. So that's the whole reason behind getting uncomfortable. The fact that these are behaviors and not fixed traits means that we can develop them as skills, which is absolutely fantastic, right? So it's a skill that can be built or taught throughout your organization. The first step, of course, with any skill, I think we talked about this earlier, is you go from being unaware to being aware. So if you were unaware that it existed before today, now you know. That's great. Once you're conscious of that gap, then you start to become, you use this model to start to become aware of, like, why is that happening? And in using a model like this, what you can do is you can become capable of anticipating and adapting. So this tool, people use this to say, I'm going to try to figure out where my prospects are, or someone I know that I'm trying to negotiate or influence or work with. And I'm going to work on closing that gap by changing my behavior. So here's how it works. I call it moving across comfort zones. The first step, you have to start by finding your zone. Once you know where you are, then you can figure out how you can change. If you know nothing else, so if you don't know who you're talking to, if you're walking into a meeting, you don't know who the prospects are, you don't know who's going to be at the table, the only thing you have to think about is moving to the center of that matrix. And so it looks like this. If you are, think about the tele-assertive and assertive side. If you are tele-assertive, meaning, you're tending to move fast and you want to get to the point, slow down and listen. That is the first and only thing you have to do to make sure you're moving towards the center. On the opposite side, if you are in the amiable or analytical zone, you have to start at the end. So we're great at, talking about anticipation and storytelling. If you're I'm on the analytical side. If you're on the side where you're ask assertive, you're great at being able to say, I'm going to start here, I'm going to build everything up. You need to start at the end, though, because you're going to lose the other side of the matrix if you don't start with the point and the impact. You will always naturally come to the point where you're going to fill in the details, because that's your natural, comfortable status. But you have to start where you're uncomfortable, which is the end. In working through the top to bottom part of the matrix, so if you're on the top of the matrix and you tend to control emotion, the best thing you can do to move towards the center is actually put emotional words in what you're saying. I think it's a little harder to change your tenor and your tone and be authentic and feel authentic. But you can put words in, like say in the middle of the meeting, how do you feel about the conversation so far? Like, that is so uncomfortable for me to say as someone who's in the controlling emotion. How do you feel? I don't want to know the answer to how you feel. Oh my God, I want nothing to do with your emotions right now. But when you say that, it's showing that you're actually moving towards the center. Or say, I really care about the resolution that we're going to come up with to this problem. Use words that convey emotion. If you're on the bottom of the matrix, so you're in that expressive or amiable zone, and you tend to display emotion, do not expect your emotion alone to win you the prospect. It's not. Your charm is going to get you so far, it's not going to do everything. So come prepared with numbers, facts, outcomes. And put those up front, again, because you're naturally displaying emotion. You're not going to forget to do the emotional part of it. It's going to be there no matter what. You're way more likely to forget to do the numbers part about it. So that's how you do it if you don't know anything at all. If you do know, if you happen to be able to have experience with this person and you have a sense of, I think I know which quadrant you're in, that's really great. But I would advise you to be really careful. Just pick one or two things to change. You're not necessarily trying to say, I want to be exactly like that other person. Just pick one or two things to mirror. If you try to, especially like I think you're trying to go diagonal, right? If you're typically in a driving zone and you're speaking to someone in an amiable zone, and all of a sudden you're coming across as this very sort of like calm, sympathetic, you're only gonna be able to do that for a very short time. And two, it's gonna look a little strange and authentic. So just take one or two and modify those behaviors. Okay. If you're uncomfortable, you're doing it right. It should feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. You don't have to do it forever. This is why I think, to conclude this, if this is you at the end of the day, that's okay. Because what you've just done is, been uncomfortable for 75% of the time. You get home and you basically say, I want to be in my couch and comfortable in myself. So thank you so much. I'm going to leave you with a couple things. One is this QR code goes to my course on a native platform that I offer. On that page, you can find a couple things. One is an assessment, so you can go in and take a free assessment of what your zone is in case you want to confirm it, or if you're curious and you're in between two zones. There's a link to book some time with me if you want to just chat about this. I love talking about this, and I welcome all of you to book some time to talk with me. There's also a little bit longer video lesson that you can watch if you want to that explains some more things in depth. And the course and the video go into like what happens in conflict with some of these styles, because it's really interesting and it's good to know if you're trying to resolve problems. Also, if you're looking to, if you like reading books, there is a fantastic book out there called People's Styles at Work. It's by Dorothy and Robert Bolton, and it's a little bit old. The dialogue and stories are a little bit dated, but honestly they do a fantastic job of explaining the model and then taking you through a ton of different exercises to get better at it. There's another book out there that is adjacent to some of this concept called Surrounded by Idiots. I don't recommend that book. I do not recommend that book. I don't think they do as thorough and clean a job of explaining how to use this effectively going forward. So I'll leave you with this, I'll end on this. Ultimately, the greatest way to think about this is that this is a twist on the golden rule, that you are not out there speaking to others the way that you want to be spoken to. You're speaking to others the way that they want to be spoken to. Thank you so much for your time.